Gauranga. Hare Krishna. Good morning from Sridham Mayapur, dear devotees. We're having our morning Bhagavatam class. Shri Guru Nitai Gaur Vallabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Vallabha Jaya Vallabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Vallabha Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Braja Yashodanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Radha Madhava Ji ki, Bolo Giriraj Maharaj ki, Premanande Hari Bol. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Sharanarottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Vede Ramayane Shaiva Purane Varate Tata Adavante Chamadye Chahari Shaivatsa Gite Mukam Karori Vachalam Vangum Vangayate Girim Yat Kripa Tamaham Vande Shigurum Vinataranam Paramananda Madhavam Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. Good morning, dear devotees. Reading from Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam, the king of all literatures. We want to greet all of our friends. Madhupati Prabhu is wishing Hare Krishna from Budapest or something like that. Advaita Chandra Prabhu and Lynn. Nice to see you, Lynn. Hare Krishna. And Sasha's here this morning too. So, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 25, text number 34 today. This is Lord Kapila Dev speaking to his mother Devahuti. Naikatmatam me sprihayanti kichin matpada seva birata madi aha ye nyonyato bhagavata prasadja sabhajante mama poroshani. A pure devotee who is attached to the activities of devotional service and always engages in the service of my lotus feet never desires to become one with me. Such a devotee who is unflinchingly engaged, maybe you could press the button on it or something, I don't know, on this side.
Yeah, I switched it off because it makes some sound.
Oh, because it was, because the power's not there.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on it. A pure devotee who is attached to the activities of devotional service and who always engages in the service of my lotus feet never desires to become one with me. Such a devotee who is unflinchingly engaged always glorifies my pastimes and activities. Reading from Srila Prabhupada's purport, says there are 5 kinds of liberation stated in the scriptures. One is to become one with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or to forsake one's individuality and merge into the Supreme Spirit. This is called ekatmatam. A devotee never accepts this kind of liberation. The other 4 liberations are to be promoted to the same planet as God, Vaikuntha, to associate personally with the Supreme Lord, to achieve the same opulence as the Lord, and to attain the same bodily features as the Supreme Lord. A pure devotee, as will be explained by Kapila Muni, does not aspire for any of the 5 liberations. He especially despises as hellish the idea of becoming one with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sri Prabodhananda Saraswati, a great devotee of Lord Chaitanya, said, Kaivalyam narakarite, the happiness of becoming one with the Supreme Lord, which is aspired for by the Mayavadis, is considered hellish. That oneness is not for pure devotees. There are many so-called devotees who think that in the conditioned state we may worship this personality of Godhead, but that ultimately there is no personality. They say that since the absolute truth is impersonal, one can imagine a personal form of the impersonal absolute truth for the time being, but as soon as one becomes liberated, the worship stops. That is the theory put forward by the Mayavad philosophy. Actually, the impersonalists do not merge into the existence of the Supreme Person, but into his personal bodily luster, which is called the Brahma Jyoti. Although that Brahma Jyoti is not different from his personal body, that sort of oneness merging into the bodily luster of the personality of Godhead is not accepted by a pure devotee, because the devotees engage in greater pleasure than the so-called pleasure of merging into his existence. The greatest pleasure is to serve the Lord. Devotees are always thinking about how to serve him. They are always designing ways and means to serve the Supreme Lord, even in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. Even in the midst of the greatest obstacles of material existence. The Mayavadis accept the description of the pastimes of the Lord as stories. But actually, they're not stories. They are historical facts. Pure devotees accept the narrations of the pastimes of the Lord not as stories, but as absolute truth. The words mama, purushani are significant. Devotees are very much attached to glorifying the activities of the Lord, whereas the Mayavadis cannot even think of these activities. According to them, the absolute truth is impersonal. Without personal existence, how can there be activity? The impersonalists take the activities mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and other Vedic literatures as fictitious stories, and therefore they interpret them most mischievously. They have no idea of the personality of Godhead. They unnecessarily poke their noses into the scripture and interpret it in a deceptive way in order to mislead the innocent public. The activities of Mayavad philosophy are very dangerous to the public, and therefore Lord Chaitanya warned us never to hear from any Mayavadi about any scripture. They will spoil the entire process, and the person hearing them will never be able to come to the path of devotional service to attain the highest perfection, or will be able to do so only after a very long time. It is clearly stated by Kapila Muni that bhakti activities, or activities in devotional service, are transcendental to mukti. This is called panchama purushartha. Generally, people engage in the activities of religion, economic development, and sense gratification. And ultimately, they work with an idea that they're going to become one with the Supreme Lord, mukti. But bhakti is transcendental to all these activities. The Srimad Bhagavatam therefore begins by stating that all kinds of pretentious religiosity is completely eradicated from the Bhagavatam. Ritualistic activities for economic development and sense gratification, and after frustration and sense gratification, the desire to become one with the Supreme Lord, are all completely rejected in the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam is especially meant for the pure devotees who always engage in Krishna consciousness and the activities of the Lord and always glorify these transcendental activities. Pure devotees worship the transcendental activities of the Lord in Vrindavan, Dwarka, and Mathura, as they are narrated in the Srimad Bhagavatam and other Puranas. The Mayavadi philosophers completely reject them as stories, but actually they are great and worshipable subject matters, and thus are relishable only for devotees. This is the difference between a Mayavadi and a pure devotee. Gora Graganya Ganagotra Goloruharam Goranga Gura Chamagopyara Kopa Briksham Gopala Gada Ratidam Yati Singha Gora Govinda Deshikavaram Satatam Numami Panchakopatarubhishcha Kripa Sindhubhyaeva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So there's a little funny things going on with my computer. I hope everybody can see this okay. There's a few devotees writing in. Srila Prabhupada's dear disciple Ramana Sukha Prabhu, my Guru Jana, who was like an uncle that I had when I was a young boy who was about 3 or 4 years older than me and treated me like a friend. Ramana Sukaprabhu was like that, although he's my Guru Jana. Ramana Sukaprabhu writes in and says, is it wrong to say that a devotee becomes, quote, one with the divine love exchange of Radha Krishna? We make some distinguishing between bhakta, bhakti, and bhagavan. And that distinguishing, according to Krishna in the Gita, as we've been discussing in verse chapter 2, text 12, is an eternal distinction. That love is distinct from the Lord, and the devotees are distinct from the Lord. But in another sense, it's correct. The devotee becomes one with them in the sense that that love becomes overwhelming for him, and he doesn't know anything else. Srila Prabhupada, speaking here in his purport about what he calls the Mayavadis, sometimes devotees, they throw this term around very freely. Mayavadi means someone who is teaching that Maya, or illusion, is superior to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the context that Srila Prabhupada is using it here indicates that someone who's being impersonal. The bhakti process is a supreme personal process. We see that other processes, they're not so personal. To one extent or another, they're impersonal. As Srila Prabhupada points out in the purport, sometimes people, they try to do some ritualistic activities for economic development and for sense gratification. But then when they become frustrated in their sense gratification, Prabhupada says, they desire to become one with the Lord, which is rejected in the Bhagavatam. So we see many people, when they go and they try to have loving relationships with other people. But the kind of loving relationships that we engage in the material world are not the nature of the soul. And as long as we're engaging in activities which are not natural for us as a soul, then they're not ultimately satisfying. And ultimately, according to the Bhagavatam itself, they have two qualities. They're hoitaki, they have some motivation. So many people have motivations in their relationships. Or they're patiyata, they end. And they end in frustration. And generally what happens then with people who try to enjoy some sense gratification and they suffer in it, they become impersonal afterwards. And they think that subtly or grossly, they think that the whole problem is these personal relationships. And that if we really want to be peaceful, then we should just give up all these relationships. So in the beginning of the purport, Prabhupada comments about 5 different types of liberation. These are described later on in the same 3rd canto by Lord Kapila Dev to Devahuti. In a famous verse, he says, Sa loka sashi samipya sarupi katha mapyata diyamanam nigrinanti vinama sevanam jana. That there's these 5 different types of liberation. Salokya, to live on the same lok, or the same planet. Sarshti, to have the same opulence as the Lord. Samipya, to be a personal associate of the Lord. Or sarupya, to have the same bodily features of the Lord. And ekatva, to have become one with the Lord. But Lord Kapila Dev tells his mother that diyamanam nagrinanti, even though diyamanam, those things may be offered, the devotees nagrinanti, grinanti means to accept, they don't accept it. Vinamat sevanam jana, without service. The devotee always wants to have service because there's so much more happiness on the level of service than there is on the level of impersonalism. But there are many, many philosophers, and they're great philosophers, and they're also great from some perspective. And they're also transcendentalists who reject all material life, and they consider that we should merge with the oneness. On one occasion, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was traveling with a group of his disciples on a train from Kolkata to Puri. Jagannath Puri. And there was one sadhu who came and sat with them, and he was an impersonalist. And he began to preach to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and his followers about the glories of oneness. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta sat and listened to him for some time, looking at him. And finally, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta shook his head, and then he ordered his disciples, he said, you bring those mangoes which someone had donated earlier. So now these mangoes, when someone had donated them earlier, they were very ripe. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had taken a vow, it's a long story, because as a young boy at the age of 4, he once ate a mango which was meant for the deity. And when his father chastised him mildly, why did you eat this? This is meant for the deity. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, that young boy, his name then was Bhima Prasad Datta, considered himself to be an offender, and he took a lifelong vow, I'll never eat mangoes again. And so some pious persons had donated some mangoes to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and his party, but Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wouldn't eat them because of his vow, and therefore his disciples wouldn't take them either. And so those mangoes had gone completely rotten, and they were smelling very, very bad. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta called for the bring the mangoes, and he told that sadhu, he said, you're saying that everything is one, but you don't believe that. And the sadhu, he became a little offended. No, how you speak like this? Definitely I believe this. No, you don't. You speak like this, but you don't really believe this. No, definitely I believe this. Then Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he said, you see these mangoes? If everything is one, then you should eat these mangoes because they're non-different from non-rotten mangoes. It doesn't make a difference if they're rotten or not rotten because all is one, right? And the sadhu said, yes, all is one. So go ahead, you eat. And so he started eating this very rotten mango. He managed to eat 4 of the mangoes. And finally he fell down at Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's feet and said, I surrender. All's not one. It's not the same. So devotees of the Lord, they understand that personalism is the highest thing. And in all their behavior, all their dealings, we should be person. And personalism ultimately means that we understand other persons to be spirit souls. Then there's no even whiff of fragrance of exploitation, which is there when we start thinking, oh, this person belongs to me. He's in my group. This is my wife, my husband, my children. And we give different, what's called in Sanskrit, upadhis or designations. And those designations are actually a kind of violence. Because as long as you're part of my party, part of my group, then I love you and you're very good. But when you stop being part of my group, then we hate you. And we no longer want to see you anymore. So that's a kind of impersonalism. Another kind of impersonalism is when we treat someone, we say, oh, women are all like this. And she's just a Mataji. Or, it's a Russian devotee. What do you expect from Russian devotees? My God, what do you think of those people? Or you say, oh, they're a Gaudiya Mat devotee, or they're a Babaji devotee. What you're doing, in effect, is you're taking away some of the personality of that individual by giving them a label. And that label takes away their personality. And we see this during war, like during World War II, when the Americans' army were doing a horrendous thing, going and fighting and killing people who happened to be from Japan or from Germany. They gave them different names, and they called the Japanese, they called them gooks, or Japs. In other words, they're not really persons. In the same way, we say, I'd like some hamburger, please. How many people walk into a McDonald's and say, yeah, can I have some of that dead cow whose baby was just nursing from its mother a week ago? Nobody speaks like that. Because they're taking away some of the personality of that thing. And so we have a very, very impersonal society. And Srila Prabhupada, he said, this is my mission, nirvisesa shunyavadi pasyachadeshatani, that I want to come to give up, to defeat this impersonalism and voidism. But there's always some tension between the personalists and the impersonalists. But the devotees, they have a taste for being personal, because being personal with someone is so sweet. It gives so much happiness to the heart. The more that we can understand another person's mood and desires, and we can and treat them in a kind way, the more happiness that we get. And conversely, the more that we treat them, oh, they're just rioters, they're just blacks. And we depersonalize persons, we dehumanize them by giving them some label, the more it causes problems both in our own heart and our own dealings and in society. So personalism is a very, very important thing. And this personalism is the root of everything in Krishna consciousness, because as we'll hear in the verse tomorrow from Lord Kapila Dev, the form of the Lord is the thing which is the most attractive, is the topmost thing. So again, there's always this kind of tension between the personalists and the saintly persons who are impersonalists, who are also saintly, and we respect them, but they have this conception that ultimately we're all one. Once there was an impersonalist who went to a Vaishnava temple, and seeing the Vaishnava's behavior, he thought, they don't understand what is real truth. So he wrote some graffiti on the wall of the temple outside. He wrote, Soham, I am that, Soham. And later that day, a Vaishnava came there and he saw, who's written this Soham? This is nonsense. Now, to really understand this story, it would help if you could read Devanagari or Bengali script. You can't all explain it as best as I can. So he came and he saw the word Soham, so he added one syllable, da, which is in the form of two characters. He added da in front of Soham and became Da Soham. I am a servant. That's what I am. And then that impersonalist fellow came back again. And he's, nonsense. Who's doing like this? And so he added a sa, another one character, sa, in front of the dasa, and became Sada Soham, that I am always him. And then the Vaishnava came and he said, this rascal, what is he doing here? So then he added another da in front of it, another one syllable. And it became Dasa Dasoham. I'm the servant of the servant. And so this story illustrates this point, that to become a servant is better than to be Bhagavan. And even better than being a servant of Bhagavan is to be a servant of the servant of Bhagavan. That's even more personal. And therefore, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, he defines the stage of Brahman realization. And he says that bhakti is something higher. Brahma bhuta prasanatma nasochati nakangshati samasarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktam labhate param. That someone who's on this Brahma bhuta platform, their symptoms are, he says, nasochati nakangshati. They never hanker, they never lament. They're prasanatma, they're very happy, they're joyful. And samasarveshu bhuteshu, they're equal to everyone. And Krishna says, if someone comes to that platform, then they can begin to perform devotional service. So this Shanta Rati, or this impersonalist relationship with the Lord, is defined by Rupa Goswami. In Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he quotes the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, Nasti yatra sukham dukkam na dvesho na chamatsara samasarveshu bhuteshu na santa pratito rasa. That condition in which there's no happiness, no suffering, no hatred, no envy, and equality shown to all living beings is Shanta Ras. But there's no happiness in it also, no ultimate happiness. The only happiness is there due to cessation of suffering. But for the Vaishnavas, when they come in touch with Krishna and Krishna's form, it gives them so much more pleasure. And in this regard, Rupa Goswami defines, he says there's two types of Shanta Rasi. Atra Shanti Ratistayi Sama Sandra Sa Sadvida. There's Sama Shanti Rati, which sama means ordinary. There's ordinary Shanta Ras. And in that state, which Rupa Goswami says is also known as asampragyata samadhi. There's samadhi, and one realizes Brahman with no functioning of the mind. It is just completely impersonal. That's asampragyata samadhi. Asampragyata means that there's no gyata, there's no functioning of the mind at all. The second type of Shantarati is Sandra Shantarati. And Sandra means intense. And in Sandra Shantarati, in that stage of samadhi, one surpasses Brahman realization and realizes Krishna's form. And this is called, also known as nirvikalpa samadhi. Nirvikalpa, it never ends. So Rupa Goswami gives different examples of that. And Rupa Goswami discusses how realizing that form of the Lord is superior. And he gives an example of this in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. He says that there was one yogi who was meditating on Brahman, and then suddenly he heard the sound of Krishna's conch shell beginning to blow. And when that yogi heard that, then Hristakambu Pataya Svanaya, tears started coming from his eyes, his hairs are standing on end, and his body began to shake. His clothes fell down on the ground. And he forgot all about the impersonal Brahman just by hearing the sound of Krishna's conch shell. So this is the nature of personalism and the nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna is personal. And when someone comes in contact, even a saintly person comes in contact with that personal feature of the Lord, then they have no interest in the impersonal feature anymore. Rupa Goswami gives an example. Tat karunya slati bhutta jnana samskara santati esha bhakti rasananda nipuna syad yata sukha. He says that just as the case of Sukadev Goswami, when someone comes in contact with the Lord, they get the mercy of the Lord, then that gyan becomes secondary. They're not very attracted by that. And they get something higher. In this regard, there's a nice story from that's told by different Vaishnavas that Vyasadeva once became despondent. And he asked his Guru Maharaj, Narad Muni, why? I've written all the 4 Vedas, I've written Vedanta Sutra, but still I'm not feeling very inspired. And Narad Muni told him, because you've given this moksha brahma gyan, or this impersonal liberation, you've given it the highest position. And that's why you don't feel satisfied. The topmost transcendentalist, Srila Vyasadeva, wasn't satisfied by that. So he was thinking to himself, yes, I need to speak Srimad Bhagavatam now. But who's going to listen to this Srimad Bhagavatam? Because so many of these saintly persons, they're impersonal. They haven't come to the personal stage yet. So I need to find someone who's widely respected by all the liberationists, by all the impersonalist personalities. So he thought, the best person is my son. Now his son was Shukadev, who was born from the womb of his wife after staying in the womb for 16 years. He didn't want to come out. And finally, Krishna personally came and told him, look, your mother's really uncomfortable. It's been a long time for her. You're a little bit big for staying in the womb. This is not very nice. And Shukadeva said, I don't care. I'm not coming out because Maya's there. And if I come out, then it's going to be very dangerous for me. And so Krishna gave him a benediction. You won't be affected by Maya. So Shukadeva, then he came out of the womb and immediately he left home. Said, family life is Maya. Looked at his mother, said, you're Maya. Looked at his father, said, you're Maya. Everything personal is Maya. And he was an impersonalist. And he left his clothes because clothes are also impersonal. Clothes are also Maya. We don't need clothes or anything. And he went wandering around in the forest. So he became widely respected amongst the impersonalist philosophers. And Srila Vyasadeva could understand that. So he thought, if I could get my son, Shukadeva, to come and speak about personalism, then everybody's going to accept it. So he called for one, unplug it, called for one forest man who used to cut wood in the forest. And he told him, he said, would you do something for me? Yes, yes, what would you like, Maharaj? And he said, I want you to recite this verse. I want you to walk around in the forest and recite this shloka. This is a shloka which appears in the first chapter of the 10th canto, it's the 4th verse. And so this woodsman, this person did this. He started wandering around through the forest and singing. Nibriti tarshaya rupa giyamana bhavosadach chotra manho abhiramat kahutama shloka gunanavadat pumandira jeta binha pashugnat. And he's wandering around singing like this. And after some time, Shukadeva heard him singing. He said, what is this? Nibriti tarshaya rupa giyamana. The verse describes that those persons who are completely detached from tarshaya, who nibrita, detached from, tarshaya means lust or material activities, they know that bhavosadach, the right medicine, is shrotamana, for the mind, is to hear the topics about Krishna. And who won't hear these topics of Uttama Shloka, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, except someone who's pashugnat. He's a butcher, someone who's killing himself. And Shukadeva heard this. He said, what is this? He said, I'm released from material activities. I'm not going in any, but now they're saying that someone who's released from material activities, they're doing something personal. What is this? This is not like something I've heard before. And so he went to that woodsman. He said, what kind of verse are you singing? And the woodsman told him, he said, I think you need to come with me. I want to introduce you to someone. Okay. And so he followed him, and he took him back to the ashram of Vyasadeva and said, he told me this verse. And Shukadeva Goswami saw, oh, this is my father. And what is this? He said, please explain to me this verse. And so then Srila Vyasadeva began to explain Srimad Bhagavatam to Shukadeva Goswami. And although Shukadeva Goswami was an impersonalist by nature, he became a personalist by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam from his great father, Srila Vyasadeva. Similarly, the four Kumaras, when they smelled, just by smelling the fragrance of the tulsi leaves coming from the lotus feet of Krishna, these four Kumaras, they were young boys who were 5 years old, and they also told their parents, Lord Brahma, look, you're Maya. Parents are Maya. Family life is Maya. We're not going to get dressed. Even we're just going to wander around naked. We're just going to be little boys the rest of our life, like eternal Peter Pans. And they were very fixed in this impersonal conception. But just smelling the tulsi leaves coming from the lotus feet of the Lord, they were defeated. Their Brahman understanding was defeated. So this is the nature of someone who has some katha ruci, or has some taste for Krishna. They never desire mukti. A devotee who has that taste never desires that kind of liberation. And there's so many, many different stories in this regard. I want to stop here. I'm going to finish with one short story. There was one very learned person who'd been studying in the university, And he'd been studying Vedanta Sutra for many, many years. Very, very learned person. And he heard something about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And so he came, he wanted to challenge him. He had some different challenging questions and things. He wanted to defeat Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And so he came to him and said, Maharaj, I have this and this and this. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said, just sit down and listen. And every day he would come for class, and every day he would raise his hand, like on a Paini Radha, raises his hand. I have some, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would ignore him every day and would look around and call on someone else. If there's nobody else, he wouldn't take any questions. He would just completely ignore that person. And after some time of just hearing every day from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, at one point he said, oh, now I understand. And all of his impersonal tendencies were defeated. And he became a devotee, he became a disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. His name became Obiel Kapoor, and he was a very dear friend of our Srila Prabhupada. So this personalism is always superior to impersonalism. It's something we all experience. If you don't believe it, you can come to my house, and I'll treat you like a coat rack, and I'll put my coat on your head and just treat you like that, and I won't greet you. How do you feel if someone does like that to you? The more that we treat it in an impersonal way, the more it hurts, because that impersonalism is not the nature of the soul. And although it may give some relief from the suffering of sense gratification, there's ultimately no satisfaction in it. And therefore, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, Brahmatmananda Dikari Purnananda Rasalayam. That Krishna, who's Purnananda Rasalayam, he's full of ananda, full of bliss, and rendering service to him is the highest, most happy thing. That bliss, Brahmatmananda Dikari, it makes fun of the happiness of Brahman. So we'll stop there. We have a few more minutes before 9 o'clock. If any devotees have any other further comments or questions or anything, this is a good time for those who see if anything's here online. Subal Sham Prabhu, Hare Krishna. Nice to see you. Mahendra Prabhu is there again. Whoa. Madhupati Prabhu said a really heavy one. The Holocaust started by denying the personality of the Jews. The Holocaust started by denying the personality of the Jews. When we treat someone as not being a person, then we can kill them. Then we can do so many things, whatever we like. Ronnie asks, she said, I can't control my mind. What can I do? It's very difficult to control the mind. But if we engage our mind in bhakti, in chanting the holy name and associating with devotees, hearing Krishna katha, then that mind, which is our enemy, becomes our friend. Lynn asks the question, do the mischievous interpretations include something like taking the stories as metaphors? I'd read that the meaning of the multitude of gopis interacting with Lord Krishna refers to Lord Krishna's interaction with the multiple emotional states within our souls. Is this a type of impersonalization of the stories of the Lord? I don't like giving black and white answers because impersonalism, because that's impersonal. Personalism is not just black and white, but there's all kinds of shades of color. Sometimes we might say yes. But sometimes our Vaishnavacharyas also treat these pastimes as a metaphor to help people to understand something deeper. But ultimately, your comment question, I would call it, is a very deep one. You have a good realization that I see implicit in your comment question, that if we say, if we place more stress on it being a metaphor than we do on it being actual history or actual something that happened, then yes, that's impersonalism. We're taking something away from that. Sometimes to help people to understand something about it, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he says that Kamsa represents the head of mundane religion. Putana, the first demon who came to attack Krishna, represents the false guru. He speaks about it in a metaphorical kind of way sometimes. But that's to help people to understand the pastime in a deeper way. But ultimately, we accept that Kamsa is a real historical person, and so is Putana. Ashwin comments a question. from whom, what characteristics should we hear Krishna katha from? Being a neophyte, I'm attracted to naturally gifted orators and storytellers. But what are the characteristics according to Shastra? Jiva Goswami speaks about this in his Bhakti Sandarbha. He says there are two broad categories of speakers: a Sarag Vakta, and a Nirag Vakta, or a speaker with material desires and a speaker without material desires. And we should hear from a speaker who is free from material desires. Srila Prabhupada, in his purport in the first chapter of Adi Lila of Chaitanya Charitamrita, he says in a broad way there's two types of persons we may hear from. One is realized, and the second person we may hear from with confidence is someone who's not realized, but they're giving good advice because they're repeating properly what they've heard. That's personalism also. Personalism means that we should hear from someone who's realized, who actually sees Krishna. In the Gita, Krishna says that we should hear from someone who's a tattvadarshi. And Srila Sridhar Swami, in his commentary on that verse, he says that tattvadarshi means aparokshana bhava sampana. It means someone who directly sees God. That's the person we want to hear from. Aparokshana bhava sampana. But we don't always find that. So then we should hear from someone who's repeating what those persons say. That's also personal. Amsamati's written something here. Would it be proper to say that while taking into consideration predominating or typical characteristics of a particular social group, we are concentrating on an individuality of a person, a representative of a group? We put a chincha beta beta tattva into practice in the social field. Yes, we can say that. We can say, that Americans are very crude people. We can say that Russian people are very, very angry people sometimes. That's a crude kind of thing to say, and it's not true of everyone, because in both cases there are people who are artists and thinkers and like that. But you may speak in a very broad kind of way. But if we only speak in that kind of way, and especially if we speak in that kind of way when we deal with someone, oh, you're a Russian, it means you are like this, or you're American, you're like this, that hurts. And Amsamati, she says, the more impersonally we're treated, the more it hurts. Thank you for that. Yeah, I sometimes people, I don't like it if someone wants to treat me as an American, or they want to treat me as a male, because there's a kind of violence, or even they want to treat me, you are ISKCON. I'm not ISKCON. I'm serving in this society, but I haven't merged with the society. I'm a person. And I don't find it satisfying when people take away my personality and want to just give me a designation, treat me as a designation. It hurts. It's impersonal. And we should be very, very careful not to do that. We do that, we've done it in the past quite a lot, especially with women, with gender designation. Oh, she's a Mataji. What do you mean she's a Mataji? She's a spirit soul. She may be a gopi in the spiritual world. She's rendering service. She has a personality. She has individuality. She has likes and dislikes. Treat her like that. But the more that we're materialistic, the less we treat them as a person. I'll give you another example. A boy sees a girl and he says, whoa, hubba hubba baby, you're beautiful. I like you in this. But he doesn't even know her. He doesn't understand that she's got a big brother who's 7 feet tall and weighs 300 pounds and really doesn't like anybody talking to his sister. He doesn't understand that that girl has a mother and father who care about her. He doesn't understand that although that girl may be very beautiful, she has a PhD in sociology. She's an intellectual. And she's not satisfied with some caveman who wants to come and be like this or that. She has a personality. She likes to dress in a certain way. She likes certain kinds of music and this and that. The more that we're impersonal, the more we take away those things. And the more we just look at them as some body for me to enjoy. So I want to stop there. Are there any real quick comments from Anapayani Radha or Krishna Krun? Just burning up that you got to say. Okay, here is Anapayani Radha. There's something personal to say.
Thank you so much for the stories which illustrate how personalism is higher than personalism. This story with the mango in Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and also the story with the writing on the wall. I just have a question about Shukadeva Goswami. So you said that he was an impersonalist, but how is it that he talked to God, to Lord, when he was in the womb of his mother? So I just didn't get this point.
Sometimes someone may actually even speak to Krishna. And it's a little complicated, frankly, to speak about Sukadeva Goswami because there's different versions given of him in different Puranas and different things said about him. My Guru Maharaj, for example, he used to say that Sukadeva Goswami was the parrot of Radharani. Before he took birth as Sukadev, or the son of Vyasadeva. So he was a personalist in that sense. So sometimes Hare Krishna devotees, when they can't answer a question, they just say, Prabhu, it's a pastime. So we can say it like that perhaps Sukadev was behaving like this for a pastime, just like when Jai and Vijay came as Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, they acted like they're enemies of the Lord. It's a pastime, but actually they're devotees of the Lord. They're not enemies. So perhaps because of that or some other reason. Okay? Okay, so we'll stop there. And we'll be here tomorrow. We're speaking something about the beautiful form of Krishna. Yes, thank you all very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol, Vancha Kalpadarubhischa, Kripa Sindhu Bhyaeva Cha